This series is sponsored by the Old School Football Shop.
Old School Football is a UK-based retro football company honouring the rich history of football past by creating high-quality embroidered vintage team crests on t-shirts, polos, hoodies and scarves. Minimalist badges from the 1800s right up to the 1990s.
On the website oldschoolfootball.co.uk, you can find English League and non-league, Scottish football, international teams and even rugby. And what's more, until the end of the lockdown podcast, listeners can get 10% off their whole catalogue plus free UK delivery. Just use the code HONEST10 at checkout for 10% off.
You can follow them on Twitter at OSF Shop, Instagram at Old School Football Shop, TikTok at Old School Football, Facebook at Old School Football Shop, and don't forget, just use HONEST10 at the checkout for 10% off.
Hello and welcome to Coaching Diaries, a new series from the Honest Football Podcast. I'm Charlie Betts and I'm a part-time football coach and a PE teacher. As a teacher, I've always been fascinated by the way coaching works in different sports and the impact that that can have on me as a football coach. Over the next few weeks, we're going to meet different expert coaches from different parts of the sporting world. We're really going to drill down into their philosophies, values and techniques of their field and find out what makes them so great at their discipline and how it can improve both you and me as coaches and as people. If you like what you hear, then don't forget to like, share and subscribe and comment below on anything that you've drawn from this series that you might want to share with others.
Next up is a returning guest and one of the most forward-thinking coaches we meet this series. It's football expert coach Ali Speechley. Ali's early love of football resulted in her having a successful coaching career as part of a Premier League club setup and now holds various roles in a variety of levels in the game. Ali is always looking to develop herself and others and can be found sharing her innovative thoughts and ideas in a variety of public speaking events. Ali is very honest about her coaching journey and really challenged me on the importance of developing and taking ownership over your own coaching philosophy. You can find Ali on Twitter at CoachAli_, and as always you can find us on Twitter at HonestFootball3. Introducing Coaching Diaries with Coach Ali.
Ali, thank you very much for coming onto the show. It's been a long time coming in the sense of I've kept you on the line for about an hour because of torn hamstrings and faulty equipment. So I do appreciate your patience. But yeah, thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me.
No, that's all right. So just before we sort of kick off, because we're going to talk to you about you as a football coach, you know, for me, you know, I've just sort of recently come across you on sort of social media and a very inspirational person, inspirational character and someone to be looked up to. But just before we start, just give us a very sort of brief background into you sort of as a coach and maybe where you coach. I know that you're a professional club and stuff like that. So just a sort of very short briefing about really who you are and where you are from a coaching perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no problem. So I coach in a couple of different environments. I coach sort of grassroots and also like foundation community work that I do for a club. But I coach, my sort of main coaching is a women's grassroots team called South London Laces. And that's when I train them one night a week and then they play Sunday League women's football.
Is it quite hard to sort of balance that with your obviously other work, or do you quite enjoy sort of doing that kind of thing in that sense?
Yeah, so I went part-time because I work outside of football as well. Mm-hmm. And I went part-time in that role in February this year to kind of allow myself more time for football coaching so that I can kind of build up that experience. So as I said, I do a bit of coaching for a club sort of foundation arm of what they do. So out coaching sort of free sessions in the community for kids, boys and girls. And also like that ranges from kind of 6-year-olds to 36-year-olds. It just depends on the program that we're running at the time. But then my sort of week to week team coaching, as it were, was, as I said, for South London Laces, which is a women's grassroots team. So yeah, they play Sunday League and I only joined them in October. So at the moment, a lot of it is kind of getting to know them and getting to try and get the best out of them on the pitch on a Sunday, but also kind of meet their needs as to why they're coming and playing football anyway. Because I think for a big thing is made about women's football, about it being very social. Now, for me, all football should be social because it's interacting with people.
Yeah.
So I think men are as equally as social when they play football as women are. But, you know, we take South London Laces as part of a whole Laces initiative. There's also Hackney Laces and Limehouse Laces. And the whole point of that initiative was that women of any ability and any age, as long as you're over 16, can come and play football in a safe environment. So for me, yeah, it's about getting to know the players, and the ones that want to play Sunday League, how can I develop them so that we can have kind of success as a team, not just in terms of winning games, but also improving and developing them as players.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant, because I think you touched on something really good there in the sense of going beyond just the sort of 90 minutes, you know, and the 3 points that are available on that front. So I think that's something we'll come back to a bit later on, actually. So yeah, no, I think that's a brilliant start to it all, really. Obviously, I think you know, there's a quote on your Twitter page where you sort of say that you don't coach football, you coach people. So I suppose the first question I've got for you, and you sort of partly answered it, but is sort of why did you, or do you want to coach, or, you know, like you say, you're involved in an actual team? I know you sort of touched on that, but maybe just in a bit more detail. Like what was it that drove you to become a coach in the first place, I suppose is a better way of wording it. So yeah.
Yeah, so I sort of became a coach by accident, to be completely honest with you. I've always loved football. There's a photo of me that I often show like on Instagram and Twitter of me playing football when I was about 5 years old.
Right.
And I'm in a little summer dress and my summer shoes, but I'm still kicking the ball about. And I was probably about a decade too early for mainstream sort of grassroots women's football, women and girls football in this country, because when I grew up, I played at school, in primary school. I played at lunchtime, but I wasn't allowed to play for the school team,
right?
Purely because I was a girl. Like, that was literally the response from the teacher because it was the boys that asked him if I could play for the team.
Right. Okay.
And he said no, and they were like, "But why, sir?" And he just said, "Because she's a girl." And that was like, you know, probably that was kind of very early 90s, and there was no discussion, there was no conversation about it. It was just like that was the answer, and that was accepted. So I kind of got into coaching. I say I got into it by accident. It's because I didn't start playing organised 11-a-side football until I turned 30.
Right.
And I started playing for a Sunday League team on Clapham Common.
Yeah.
And it was when I was training with that team that we got offered free spaces on an FA Level 1 course.
Yeah.
Because the amateur FA had offered out free spaces to all the women's teams. So I kind of put my hand up and said, yeah, I'll go on that, just to kind of see what it was about, not really expecting anything to come from it. And I enjoyed the course. I have to say, this was the old FA Level 1 and Level 2. I did enjoy Level 1, but I felt like I could learn a bit more. I felt like it was very much just about safeguarding rather than
I'm glad you touched on that really quickly, because I did the old Level 2 as well. So I'm 30, so I'm probably, you know, old enough to remember the old Level 2 and all of that. So, you know, in that sense. So I think, there's been a lot of a change recently. Sorry, it's awful grammar, isn't it? And there's been quite a change recently, isn't there, in terms of the, you know, obviously the way they've restructured the sort of different badges. And I know it's not, we'll get onto that conversation about badges a bit later on, but, you know, I think the old Level 1 was more a means to an end, wasn't it, really? I think
it was sort of creating a safe environment, which obviously is very important in football, but so what happened was that's why I say I got into it by accident. I guess it wasn't entirely by accident, but I didn't go into it pursuing a coaching career. I did it because it was a free course, and I thought, I'll go and see what it's about. And then I really it kind of sparked my interest. But the reason I talked about me playing football as a girl is that I got into coaching. I decided to pursue it beyond Level 1 because I wanted to create opportunities for young girls to play football in the way that I never had. So even though there were, because Millwall Lionesses has been around for years, and when I was at secondary school, I knew a girl who played in that academy, that girls' academy. So it wasn't that there weren't necessarily opportunities for girls to play football. There were just very limited opportunities for girls to play football, because even if you were good enough, you had to be able to afford it. And so for me, it's about making sure there are opportunities for anyone to play football, regardless of whether they're going to be the next Lioness or whether they just want to kick it about in a park.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, actually. I know I mentioned it in the introduction earlier about you being an inspiration, but I think that actually the way that you sort of, you view why you do that, why you do your sort of coaching, or why you're involved in women's football in the first place, I think that comes from such a place that probably loads of other women can relate to, I think. And I think that's, because I don't know, obviously from our perspective, on the other side of the fence, for want of a better phrase, my only exposure to women's game growing up sort of in the 90s was they put the FA Cup final on like BBC on like a Sunday afternoon. And that was it. And like you say, that, obviously you don't just get two teams turn up for a final. So there was a whole competition that took place to get to that point that I never saw, never knew about. And I think, I think that's why we need as many people like yourself out there who come from that background of like you say, it's that opportunity. I think, without getting on my sort of PE teacher sort of stuff, even in schools it gets lost a little bit now, that it is about, I think we take for granted how much of an opportunity we as coaches, teachers, etc. can create for, I suppose nowadays a bit more, even like not just boys and girls, but people from different backgrounds and cultures and stuff. Even in that sense, I suppose it's I still feel like it's taken for granted a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Like,
and I think never underestimate the power of seeing someone who looks like you doing something you want to do. So whether that be a woman doing it, because you never really see a woman doing it, or whether that's a black person doing it or an Asian person doing it, or, someone wearing a hijab, like never underestimate the power and the influence of showing young people, look, you can do this because I look like you and I'm doing it. And I think that was what it was for me, because even me now as I'm never going to have a career as a professional footballer. I'm 37 and, if I was going to do it, I'd have done it by now. But I do have a career as a coach, and that also shows my players that I'm coaching that even if you don't make it, if that is your dream to make it as a player, even if you don't for whatever reason, because the chances of making it as a professional player for both men and women are very small. So even if you don't make it, like there are lots of roles in football for you. And I think what I've wanted to try and stress recently is that I are very much, predominantly coached in women and girls football, but I think it's important for women to be seen in men's football and men to be seen in women's football as well, because I think we need to get past this, well, that's for them and that's for them. It's like, it's a sport and we're all capable of playing and coaching it.
Yeah, I think you've touched on, sorry, I know I keep going back to schools, but in terms of youth coaching, that's probably where I have more of an experience. And I think I met recently, when I was speaking to you, when we were trying to organise this, I was at like a futsal tournament for girls. And I know sort of, just from probably like in the same way you do on the coaching circuit, you sort of on the teaching circuit, teachers who work at different schools. And I know that there's male PE teachers at particular schools who were at this county competition, and yet they would send a female teacher. And I'm not saying that person didn't deserve to be there or anything like that, but it's like you were just saying about it's almost like, right, that's a girls' tournament, so we'll send the female PE teacher, even though I know that, for example, one of the male PE teachers might be a level 3 coach. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. And why shouldn't the girls in that school, for example, receive the same treatment, or not treatment, that's the wrong word. But
just
do you know
level of coaching. I was going to say, I think it's about also kind of, obviously with children there's a safeguarding element as well,
of course,
and a female can go into the changing room and all that kind of stuff, but that doesn't mean that you couldn't just have a female teaching assistant. If there's a sort of more qualified coach or better person to go with those children that happens to be a man, then yeah, why shouldn't they have that level of coaching? And I think that actually kind of links into one of my frustrations that I felt in the summer with the Women's World Cup, around like the level of officiating. And I just felt like it was almost like, because this is a women's tournament, everything has to be female. And this might be an unpopular opinion, but that annoys me, because yes, I want there to be more women at all levels of the game, but if we're not there yet, let's not send out a female referee who isn't, for whatever reason, ready to referee at that level, because it's not good for the game. It's not good for those players. It's not good advert for the sport, and I'm not sure that that's good development for that referee, quite frankly, because that could have a very bad impact on her sort of future in terms of how she feels about refereeing.
Yeah, I think I think you've touched on a great point there, and I think it is that seeing past the fact of so and so's sort of male or so and so's female, and who is the best person for that job. And I agree. If anything, that can do the opposite of maybe what people like yourself and that are trying to do, which is create opportunities, create inspiration for people. And actually, if you get someone who's out of their depth, not even out of their depth, is not quite got the level of experience needed for that particular fixture, for example, you get your fingers burnt. Suddenly, they then shy away, disappear. And that person who could have potentially been an inspiration to lots of others is then, because they were sort of fast-tracked through because of maybe, like you say, their gender, which I think is maybe slightly controversial opinion in the sense of people don't want to necessarily voice it. And I think you're very brave for saying that, actually. But I think
we'll find out.
Well, yeah,
we'll find out when you release the podcast.
Yeah, see if this bombs or not. No, it is. But yeah, no. So I think it's a really good point, actually. But I agree with you. I do think it should be the best person for the job. And I think that links back to what you were saying, even your own experience as a player when you were at school. Like, if you were good enough to be in the team, regardless of your gender, then you should be there, really. I was just going to move on slightly, just because obviously we've been talking in quite a lot of generalities about, the ladies' game and stuff. But I really, while we've got you on here and the experience you've got, I want to sort of tap into a bit more about you, the coach as a person, and where your sort of values in that lie, really. So, you mentioned earlier, obviously, you did your level 1, a couple of years ago. Well, a few years ago, and obviously you're working towards your level 3 now, I believe. Is that right?
Yeah.
So I just wanted to sort of ask you a question. It's like a bit of a double question, really. But what did you sort of, when you first became a coach, what did you expect your main values to sort of be when you sort of stepped into it? I know you sort of alluded to that, but it's more the second part of it, and I suppose what the next part is has that changed as you've gone through? The sort of however many years you've been coaching for now. So sort of your expectations and your values at the beginning, and then compare that to sort of, Ali now, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure. So I think I did my level 1. I think it was about 2014. I can't remember. But and because I did it at a time when, so I did my level 1 and then my level 2, and I did all my youth modules separately.
Right.
Whereas now I know I did the youth award, but now I think they're all sort of encompassed within the levels, which I think is really good. And I think the way the FA have revised the coach education, it has been for the better. But in terms of me, when I first started out as that sort of level 1 coach, like as I said earlier, I didn't go on the level 1 thinking I was going to become a coach.
No.
I think I went on it kind of more as a player to sort of try and help me as a player, because I'd never been coached before, and I was like early 30s, and I think it was for me to sort of try and understand the game a bit better. But once I decided that actually I did want to pursue coaching, I think for me it has always been about people, because I'm very much a kind of people person, and I like to relate to people on their level, and regardless of background or circumstance or anything like that, like how can I reach you? So I think as a coach, that has always been a constant for me in terms of getting to know the person. I think if anything, I've just sort of refined that and developed it over the years.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I kind of really sort of crystallized in my own mind when I was doing my UEFA B license, was to kind of come up with a coaching philosophy. And for me, I just found it sort of clearer in my own mind, and I know a lot of coaches do this, to kind of form it around keywords.
Right.
And so for me, it's kind of, I structure it around engage, educate, empower.
Right.
And every time I coach, or every time I'm planning a session, or any time I'm doing anything to do with coaching, even if it's like something like this, for example, I try and make sure I'm hitting at least one of those.
Right. Okay.
Ideally all three, but as long as I'm doing something to hit one of those, because for me, that's kind of that's what I kind of want to focus on as a coach, because I believe it helps the players. So I was just going to say, when I was doing my B license, it was very much around why are you doing this? And I think that really helps you as a coach, because then it's not, because every coach can fall into the trap of making it about themselves. And I think if you say you've never done that, you're a liar.
Well, do you know what I was about to say? I'll probably listen back to the interview I did for our own podcast, and I'll probably cringe now after that, because I think you're right. No, I think no, but it's true. It's very easy to fall into that trap. You know, I was, I really love that those three words. Actually, that's something that, you know, I think I'd even take into my job. But, you know, from a teaching perspective, I think that is fascinating. Actually, sorry, carry on. I sort of interrupted you a bit there. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. So I was going to say, like, we've all, like, I've been guilty of it. We've all been guilty of kind of making it about us, but really it shouldn't be. Everything we should do should be about those players. And if we can't answer why that's connected to those players, we need to then question why, like, should we be doing it?
Yeah.
And that really helps you focus in on what it is that you're actually spending that training session doing, or spending that match doing. So I think, in terms of, like, that's a bit of a long-winded answer to your question, but essentially, I think for me, it's always been about people, and I've just kind of refined that over the years, because I think also when I started coaching, I didn't feel like I really knew that much about football. Like I said, I've always loved football. I've kicked a football about since I could walk, but I've never been in and around organised football, like, until I chose to be, which was relatively late in life. And so anything I knew about football just came from watching it on TV, which I did a lot, but I hadn't really gone to that many live matches, which, as you all know, as a coach, like, is completely different and changes your perspective, and you get to see everything, not just where the ball is, and all of that kind of stuff. Like, I'd never really done that. And so I started to kind of teach myself the game. And I'm still learning, and people say always learning, but it's true. Like, I will never know everything there is, because the game changes as well.
Well, that's the thing. I think I think you hit it nail on the head. Is it the environment you're in is always constantly changing. I think that's what makes it such an addictive and such an enjoyable sort of job to, anyways, for that reason, you know, like you say. So I think that's fascinating because just on a very, very quick side note, like, I love reading about sports psychology and all that kind of thing. And you know, you say about always learning. I've picked that up from you just then. I think that's fascinating sort of insight and a fascinating mantra is probably the wrong word, but I think it's something that definitely you know I'll use now in terms of underpinning what you do, whether it be coaching or actually I think even as a teacher. And I keep banging on about that. Sorry, I'll stop shoehorning that in. But it's about, like, but using that in, I think that can be used in lots of different spheres in life, really. I suppose, can't you? If you're trying to hit those three, because that's sort of
no, definitely. And I think it's because it's about empathy. Like, for me, so the reason I say engage is because, like, I'm trying to teach. If you're a player, I'm trying to teach you something, which is the educate part, right? Yeah. But in order for me to teach you, I have to reach you first. And the best way to reach a person, in my opinion, is to reach them on their level initially. Because if you come at someone in a way that they can't relate to, why are they going to listen to you? Yeah. So it's not that I will always, like, feel like I always have to just be on their level all the time. I might try and educate them so that they themselves can then learn to communicate on another level. But initially I will engage them on their level. Then comes the education. And then it's about, because I've taught you something, now I need to, well, the whole time really, I need to be creating an environment for you that you feel safe and empowered to get it wrong. Because all learning really is getting it wrong until you get it right.
I was about to say, you've probably nailed the next 2 or 3 questions for me. So that was...
sorry.
No, in a good way. No, because I think, I was going to talk to you about, like, you've obviously massively answered the next one, which was going to be, how do you know when you've delivered a particularly good session? And obviously you spoke about hitting those 3 targets that you set for each one. And even, like, from my own personal perspective, I find sometimes the worst sort of, when I feel like I've had a bad session, actually the players themselves have probably made more progress in that session than maybe the super duper one where everything ran smoothly and do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. And that's what you were saying about that empowering, I suppose, to not be afraid to make mistakes almost. And so. And
that goes for us as well. Like,
exactly. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Definitely.
So the next thing I've obviously sort of mentioned that was about, so the next bit was about how do you know, maybe you haven't delivered necessarily a particularly good session. What do you do off that? But I think you've sort of nailed that really. But I think, to be honest, it's that empowerment, I think, of the 3. Obviously, all 3 are important, but for me, I think that's the one that personally, I feel like I need a lot more development in. I think sometimes, like you were saying, about making it about ourselves as coaches, is sometimes it's that control thing, isn't it? Because I think to empower people, you need to hand over control to them a little bit, in the sense of, you can do.
Well, this is it, because I was just going to say, you're absolutely right when you say, like, in order to empower people, you have to relinquish some of that control, because ultimately, like, you're trying to create leaders, you're not trying to create followers. And when you give up some of that control, that's what you then get. You get people that then feel empowered to come up with their own ways of leading something. Because especially in sport, whereby you as a coach, really, what can you do when the ball's rolling?
Exactly.
That's their game.
Yeah.
And that's true at any level. Like, yes, you can make tactical changes. Yes, you can do substitutions. But ultimately, when that ball is in play on the pitch, those players need to be making those decisions. And you screaming at them, because I know that happens a lot in youth football, where it's like, don't shout at the kids. But to be honest, I'm not looking to shout at adults either. No,
I totally agree.
Because, like, they've got to make that decision. And also, like I said, it all comes back to, I need to know my players. And if a player does something, I need to know whether they did that because they understood it and they'd read the game, or they did it because someone told them to do it.
And that's the thing. Like, I totally agree with some, adult football, particularly, even where, I'm sort of coaching at the minute, in that sort of semi-professional setting, the amount of people, and you sort of feel like saying, the way that you're doing this, you might as well go home and play like FIFA or Pro Evo on your PlayStation, in the sense of just trying to micromanage every single aspect of a game. And you sort of, I completely get what you mean. And it is very frustrating to sort of, to watch that and sort of be involved in that. I mean, I'm going a little bit off script here, so I apologise if it comes across a bit of a waffly sort of question. But I think from my perspective, sometimes it's just trying to make them be able to, like you say, cope when they're not with you as well. And maybe cope's the wrong word, but being adaptable. So, in this situation or in this environment where you are now, obviously we're doing this, but if I'm not here, or if when you're on the pitch, like you say yourself, can you still use and apply what you've sort of been doing, really? And I think that's probably the toughest thing that I think. I don't know. I feel like there's an older generation of coaches and managers, and that's not to slander anyone, because my dad was one as well, where it is a bit more of that loud, blairy sort of, do this out of fear almost. And like you say, I fell foul of that as a player, of doing stuff, not really understanding why. Like, the amount of times that I probably tried to play an offside trap and had no idea why I was doing it. Do you know what I mean? And
that's thing. And this is exactly what I mean by this why question.
Yeah,
this
exactly.
Why question changes everything. Because if you apply it every single time, then that's how you really drill down into the detail. And that's, ultimately how you come up with the best session or tactics or substitution or whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. You will come up with the best solution if you honestly ask yourself why.
Yeah, no, I think that's possibly the most challenging thing. I think that any coach, whether it be someone like you say who's just starting out in their sort of coaching journey or someone, you know, near the end.
Absolutely. And everyone gets it wrong. Like, look at like Premier League managers that make mistakes. I think this is the thing. I think sometimes, like, I can kind of say all this stuff, and I think people think that therefore then I do it all the time. No, like, I make mistakes all the time. I make mistakes every time I coach, but that's learning. And again, it's because I've allowed myself, and I've created for myself, and I've purposely entered environments that allow me to do that. Because otherwise, and that's why, you know, we always talk about like armchair managers, like all the people that sit at home and watch football on Sky Sports and think that they like, why the hell has he made that substitution? Why hasn't he done that? It's easy from there, mate. But
that's true.
On the touchline, you wouldn't necessarily always make the best choices. And I think this is what I mean about this being about people. Yes, it is a sport we love, and yes, we're passionate about it, and yes, at the highest, like, elite level, people get paid a lot of money to get it right, but we are all still human, and because we're human, we're flawed.
I think
it's about allowing ourselves and each other to kind of get it wrong, and as long as there's then an honest reflection on that, then there's learning. If there's not an honest reflection, that's when you keep going around and making the same mistakes.
And I think that's exactly sort of that over-labelling the point. Exactly, you know, I think you've hit the nail on the head with, in the sense of like I think I sort of mentioned earlier about the some of the worst sessions I feel in terms of delivery have probably been the ones where, even in school, where they've made the most progress. And I think it is that problem solving, isn't it? In a sense, it's that problem solving sort of element to it. And like you just sort of mentioned, then it's having taken ownership over that, you know. So I think it can be an easy trap to fall into as a coach, to be too proud or to be quite prideful and not sort of see those areas for development, and actually, like you say, and being brave enough like yourself to sort of put yourself out there to sort of try and address them. So I think that's very admirable, you know. And I think there's a lot to be sort of said from that. I always liken it a bit to sort of golf, you know, in the sense of, you know, I'm a terrible golfer, but you know, you might see, like, I don't know, Tiger Woods put one in the bunker, you know, in the sand, and yet I'll go and do it and get really annoyed, and you sort of think, this man's worth about $85 million or whatever it is. He does it, and yet I, who play once every 6 months, is annoyed. Do you know what I mean? I think it can be a bit like that in coaching. Like, you've got to be realistic with it, haven't you? And I think,
and sort of just lastly on that point, I think, like, we you know, very much in youth football, like, it's about repetition. And so, like, the amount of times people are like, oh, but we've been through this, we did this last week, and it's like, you did it with them once for 45 minutes. They're not going to know it perfectly. But even when you look at elite athletes who have done it for years and years and years and years and years and years and years, and can do it in their sleep, there will always be a reason why they don't perform. And I saw the other day Jesse Lingard come out and say that he's been struggling recently. And then I thought back and I thought, oh yeah, actually his performances and he had come under a bit of slack about them. And, you know, he's come out and been quite honest about what was going on in his head at that time. And I think, again, like, because he is a human being, he's not a robot. Definitely. He doesn't just, like, wake up and put on his kit and then go and play football.
And like, I think we're guilty of expecting that, aren't we? At any level, not just in the Premier League.
Yeah, definitely. You know? And but that's almost my point, is that if it happens with them,
exactly,
like, obviously it's going to happen with, like, the 15-year-olds you're coaching down the road. Like, they bring everything that has happened to them, they bring with them.
I think that's fascinating. I read a book by. Have you heard of Matthew Said? You know, he's like used to be a professional table tennis player, but he's like you hear it. He's on the radio, but I think he writes now. He did a book about, you know, talent versus nurture and nature.
Right,
and it was just going back to that repetition thing that. You know, it was a massive study that he did across all of these different sportsmen, and Michael Jordan's obviously quite a famous one who talks about that. You know, his upbringing in terms of sport, but the average, you know, that whole 10,000 hours sort of thing. And it is that, you know, like, there was a story of a man who basically taught his daughters to become world chess champions by just that constant repetition, and eventually they became world chess champions. You know what I mean? So it's that kind of thing with football. And I think, like you say, actually, one of the best things I did at work once was I got one of my teaching assistants when I was teaching to time how much time I was talking, how much time the kids were actually doing something, you know, worthwhile. And you'll be amazed, I think, and I'm sure it's the same with football coaching, you'll be amazed how much time you're talking. So you mentioned that 45 minutes. the reality is, like you say, oh, we've done this last week, we've done it once. But in terms of the actual contact time with the ball, I think not necessarily you personally, but coaches in general would be amazed how much they are actually doing it. Do you know what I mean? And if you're talking about making it 10,000 hours to be an elite sportsman at it, suddenly that's a lot more repetition you need to be doing than what we probably allow for, really.
And they talk about purposeful practice as well.
That's exactly
not just practice, but actual purposeful practice. So,
yeah, definitely.
And again, for me, that links into the why, and that's how you kind of identify and then deliver the purposeful practice, is if you come back to why, because otherwise it isn't meaningful to them. So you as a coach might want them to play in that formation or whatever. Have you got the personnel? Are they able to play in that way? Are you setting them up for a fail?
No, I totally agree with you. Do you know, to be honest, Ali, I'm going to throw the script out that I had all these questions because I love the.
I keep ruining it.
No, not ruining it. No, completely opposite. I actually love the different directions it's gone in. As I say, sort of, it's more about hearing from you, and these questions were more prompts, to be honest. So I'm going to bin most of them off. But obviously, that was obviously quite an in-depth discussion, and your philosophy has come out in that. Just wanted to sort of really tap into quickly before we move on. Like, what do you find personally is the most challenging aspect of sort of being a coach? Or we'll do the opposite of that. We'll do the positive part in a minute, but we'll get the negative one out of the way. Like, what for you do you find like the biggest sort of challenge or the biggest hurdle for you personally as a coach, if that makes sense?
Yeah, and for me, because as I said earlier, I'm learning the game, and for me, it is having the confidence in my tactical and technical knowledge, because actually a lot of it I do know, but because it has been very recently acquired or self-taught or that kind of thing, I don't always have the confidence in it. So what I find sort of challenging is delivering that very specific technical information to players in a way that makes sense to them, that doesn't take forever. and that what I have to do is I almost have to study it and get a bit geeky about it, so that I have to do my 10,000 hours almost, I have to do all my learning so that I know it inside out, so that I trust my knowledge. So when I come to deliver it to the player, I don't feel phased by it. But that is very much a work in progress for me. I'm still learning the information and therefore building the confidence to deliver it in a useful way.
I think that's a fascinating point. And I think maybe what we've spoken about earlier about what we expect from players in terms of or how we expect to sort of develop players, I suppose the same applies to us. Like you say, it's if we were expecting players to be able to take ownership over their sort of learning and their, if we're expecting them to be able to adapt to different scenarios and situations, I suppose the same has to go for us as sort of leaders or facilitators as well, doesn't it? How often do you turn up to a session and you're down a certain amount of numbers, or so-and-so's left, well, I know this is a bit more grassroots, but so-and-so's left the cones and balls, half of the football's in someone's car that's not there. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing. So I suppose if we're expecting that of the kids, and that's on a more basic level, and then we're, like you're saying, a bit more about the tactical element to it, a bit about being prepared for that and how you can adapt quickly to that as well, I suppose, is, practice what you preach, I suppose, is the message for it, really, isn't it, in that sense?
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, so and then on the sort of more positive side of that, so I didn't mean to sort of what for you, I know you've mentioned about your sort of those that sort of mantra, those 3 targets that you work towards, but what do you find the most rewarding part of being a coach, and it doesn't have to necessarily be an outcome based one, but just what for you is, if you had to nail one thing as the most rewarding part of being a coach, what would that sort of be, really?
It's having a positive impact, and that can look very different depending on the person or the session or the environment or whatever, but it's coming away feeling like they enjoyed that, or they learned something, or they were having a rubbish day and actually this has cheered them up, or they were really upset and we talked about it, and whatever it is, It's just knowing that there's been some kind of positive impact.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important for me, because that's true for me too. Like I can have had a very difficult day in the office or whatever and think, oh, I've got to go and coach. And then I get there and the players, like, their energy lifts me. But I also know that as a coach, I have to bring that energy too.
Yeah.
And because I definitely believe in that whole, like, you should sort of embody the values you want to see. And if I turn up like I'm bored or I'm late or whatever, like, that's why should I expect my players to be on time and energetic?
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that sort of helps me is I bring the energy because I feel like I should, and it's sort of almost it's a little bit like fake it till you make it, like, because if I've been having a bad day, I'll bring the energy because I know I should, but then it sort of tricks my mind into thinking that actually I am that energetic, and it kind of lifts my mood too. So I think just having a positive impact really, in whatever way that might be.
Yeah, I know. I think that's actually, I think you're probably at the forefront of a new sort of a new age of coaching in that sense, because I think if you'd have asked maybe someone who had been coaching for maybe 10, 15 years ago, 10, 15 years longer than me or you, their outcome, I imagine, would be a lot more tangible.
3 points.
Exactly, yeah. Essentially, that's probably, what I was trying to get at. Yeah, completely results-based. And actually, the fellow I mentioned earlier who manages the team that I coach for, he's my best mate. We've known each other since we were kids. But quite often, if we were involved in a game on a Saturday, they might get a scrappy 1-0 win, and he's come off happy as Larry because obviously he's got his 3 points. But for me, as a coach and things that maybe we've worked on or whatever, I'm maybe not, there's an element of, right, actually, I wasn't as happy with A, B, and C, So I think it's your, like you're saying, your mindset, and that I think is a much better one than what it was for people 20 years ago. It was about those, right, if they're winning games, I'm doing well as a coach. And actually, I think it's really important we get on board with the whole thing outside of that, like, which is what you're sort of alluding to. I love the fact that actually your most rewarding part was something that wasn't, not that it can't be measured, obviously it can be measured, but it's not something that's having an impact on a league on a Saturday morning. Do you know what I mean? So
yeah, although I would say on that as well, like, something I've kind of learned is that matters to the players. Like,
of course,
winning matters. It is a competition. They've turned up to win, and when they don't, it's important to manage that effectively. And that is true at all levels of both genders, because there's this like myth in, like, especially in girls, so not necessarily women's football, because obviously there's been a big growth in sort of the development of professional women's football now, but even at sort of a very young age in girls, there's this idea that they're all just sort of like there to have a good time and hold hands and stuff, and la 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 la. And it's like, no, they want to win. Like, there will be sliding tackles. They've come here to win, and I love that. And I think it is a competitive sport, but it's about teaching them, what success means. And yes, ultimately, everyone wants to win a match. We wouldn't be in it if we weren't interested.
No, completely agree with you.
But it's also like you were saying, well, actually, as my goalkeeper managed to, play out from the back using, their centre backs at all this match, like, because that's something we'd worked on or whatever. Like, that could be a success. And I think sometimes it's maybe a little bit easier to set those sort of targets within youth football, because I think when you get into adult football, it's just a bit like, no, come on. But that is down to the coach, and that's about the culture you create and the mindset that you kind of create an environment for.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because I think that's you touched on a brilliant point there, and especially in the higher up you go, obviously, the way clubs are structured. So, for example, a lot of the work that I do is with a reserve team and the 18s, and actually, the main purpose is eventually for them to feed through to the first team in that sense. So, the difficult balance we have is, for me as a coach, it's about trying to make them develop them in such a way that they could hopefully get to play for the first team. Actually, as a manager, my mate is a reserve team. It's, you know, about him maybe keeping his job is what are the results looking like. So I think that's a brilliant sort of point. And it's trying to balance the two. And I think the sort of key word for that is that culture that you create. That's the sort of thing. And that expectation. What are they coming there for? Are those lads who maybe have just broke through from the 18s who are coming to play for the reserves this week? Are they there because they want to win a game and push their team up the league in that reserve league or whatever, you know? Or is it about, I just want to learn, play against, you know, my first experience of adult football, see how I can measure up, and then can I make it to the first team? And I think it's so important, and where that starts from, I don't know if that starts from us as coaches, and, you know, particularly me, who's fairly low down the chain in that club, or is it from someone high up, you know, who's in charge of all of it? I don't know what you think really on that sense.
Yeah, I think the role of a sporting director is quite a crucial one, and obviously not every club, especially in grassroots or whatever, will necessarily have the luxury of that. And some, in certain environments, it will just be you as the coach.
Yeah.
But I think, you know, when you move into sort of maybe more professional or elite structures, for me, I'm almost a bit baffled by why not more clubs have a sporting director that you know, oversees the football in terms of, this is our culture, this is our DNA, and it almost doesn't matter who comes in and is the manager, because we will recruit people that believe in that philosophy. And yes, they're going to put their personal spice on it, but ultimately they believe in our core values, and we're going to recruit those people to deliver them, because then you don't have this sort of revolving door problem that you're starting to get in sort of men's Premier League clubs, where it's just manager after manager after manager.
Yeah, definitely.
And then you end up with this sort of like negative legacy problem, whereby a manager comes in, buys a load of players that they want, then gets the sack for whatever reason, and then the new manager comes in and has got to work with all these players that they wouldn't necessarily have got. Whereas if you had, you know, a general kind of overall philosophy that moved all the way through the academy as well, so your coaching staff in the academy understand it and buy into it and believe in it, and they are developing players for your first team, because they're going to play in that way, because that's how your club plays, then... And I know I've made that sound like really simplistic, but I also think in football we overcomplicate it.
Oh, big time, yeah. and at its core, it doesn't.
More difficult.
Yeah, exactly. At its core, it doesn't need to be that difficult. Like in terms of that DNA thing that you talk about, it doesn't really, does it? You know, like you say, people don't have to make it difficult, I think. And sometimes that's to keep them in a job, I think, which is a bit sad. You know, sometimes it's to be seen to be doing something rather than, you know. But yeah, no, I think that's. I think basically what we need to do is get you in the FA, and hopefully we can solve the problems with that.
I did see an interview with Dan Ashworth. It was quite interesting. Him talking about that approach at Brighton in terms of medium to long term. Like that is the role. His role is about the medium to long term. It's not the day to day on the pitch with the players. It's what is the medium to long term vision for this club. And he spoke really well about that. And I just wonder why. I guess it's because at that level, football's just a big business, isn't it? And unfortunately, you've got to win or you're in trouble.
Yeah,
so
well, it's a lot
of time for medium to long term.
No, it's a sort of money at stake for that, really. Just to finish, Ali, on the last question, really, because I've got to be honest, that was a fantastic episode, and I think, you know, I really appreciate you sort of giving up the time to do that. We sort of finish on a question. This sounds like it's, you know, as if someone's passed away or anything. It's not like that at all. But the question is if we asked one of your players in the future to describe how you were as a coach, how would you like them to remember you? You know, if you were to sort of sum up in a couple of sentences. As I say, it sounds quite morbid. It's not meant like that. It's just sort of what legacy, I suppose, are you leaving with maybe the people that you're coaching now, if that makes sense?
I guess I'd want them to say that she understood us and she cared.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think that probably sums up the whole discussion we've had in a nutshell. And I think, you know, I mentioned it at the beginning, and I do genuinely, sincerely mean it. You know, you are an inspiration to lots of people, and I think you're at the forefront of a new wave of coaching, and you know, I think we need to really support people like yourself and get behind people like yourself in that sense of
those sort of core values you speak about, and the fact that that's the way you want to be remembered, I think that sort of sums it up perfectly, really. So,
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali, for doing that. I really appreciate you coming on, and I'm hoping that the people who listen to this will take hopefully quite a lot from that, because I think there was a lot to take from it. So, but yeah, I know that even in this discussion, even if no one else develops, for me, I think I've learned loads from talking to you. So yeah, thank you so much for giving up your time, and it was a pleasure to talk to you, really.
Thank you for having me on.